So am I going a step too far if I understand it that relationship between male and female is a kind of fractal based on that pattern of the relationship between the father and the son?
Yes. Yes.
That's
Yes.
the correct.
And the great thing about this is that it fits male and female, the difference between men and women, into the same pattern as many other relationships, fathers and sons, and parents and children in
Hmm.
general,
Hmm.
mothers and children, but then also priests and people, kings, political leaders, in the Christian sense, have this role of self-giving, of living for the country that they're serving.
Father Patrick, welcome along on board for a conversation. Looking forward to talking to you.
Oh, me too. Thank you for the
Great.
invitation.
So I was introduced to you by a good friend and kind of colleague, collaborator, Christian Hauser, who pointed out your work. And you, I found out, have been talking for actually since I was about 8 years old, writing books about subjects that I've been really trying to understand more recently. So I'm really
Right.
happy that we're going to get to have a conversation. And some of the topics about, right at the heart of this, what we're trying to do here on Manifesto is understand on a deeper level, what is the difference between men and women? What are the similarities? How do we relate to each other? How do we understand and work productively together as well? We just found before we started recording that both of us actually were attracted to Orthodox Christianity through part of that was part of the reason why we came to this faith was trying to understand these differences as well. You said it was research, getting to the roots of things that you
Yeah.
found that, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So, the topic that I want to start with today is because recently the country where I'm living, Denmark, and the Danish government has made some global headlines because we have decided to introduce what they're calling full equality in the armed forces and the military, which means that women and men not only will be given equality, but also treated identically through the entire process of conscription and recruitment and all the way through, like trying to, as I can see it, kind of eradicating any kind of different treatment of male and female, assuming that they are the same. And so all the way back in 1989, then you wrote a book, actually, which is called Weak Link, Flirting with Disaster. Sorry, no, the first one was Women in the Military, Flirting with Disaster. Is that right? No, Weak Link.
First one was Weak Link, the feminization of the American military. Yes.
Feminization of the American military,
89.
um, where you were also testified on a presidential commission on the assignment of women in the armed forces in 1992. I've discovered about the influence of recruiting women, um, and I want to understand better. Given what's happening in Denmark today, is what were the reasons that you felt that clearly you felt that women would weaken the armed forces of the United States, and then also to try and see if we can be more nuanced on, like, do you believe that women should be totally excluded from the armed forces, or are there specific roles that women can and should play,
Right.
and if they want to, and how all of that works. Um, so maybe to get right to the point, though, to start off with, you make this case that the inclusion of women in the military reduces our ability to be able to fight effectively. And I also kind of get the understanding, or sometimes the impression, that the government is trying to hide this information from us or block it away or something like that. Is that correct? Would you say that there's like a kind of campaign to try and hide that understanding?
Oh, it has been from the start. Yes. Well, actually, the part of what I tell about in the first book and also in the second book, because the second book includes a lot of what is in the first book. The first was published in 89, the second one was published in 98, and a lot happened between those books that occasioned my publisher moved him to want to publish it again and expanded greatly. So the second book is actually twice as large as the first book.
Mhm.
And as I say, includes much of the first one. But all along, it is earlier on, well, actually from the beginning in the US at least, the inclusion of women was politically driven. It was not something the military wanted. They didn't want to do it in World War II. And yet it was something that Eleanor Roosevelt, the first lady, was very interested in. So she pushed it. And so the military just did that to please her. They were always problematic then, and the military, as soon as they could, went back to not having many women at all. And it reached its lowest point in the late 60s there during Vietnam. But then the all-volunteer force came up, and the idea was, well, we can make this work by bringing in more women. And when they did that, the military services still weren't keen on the issue and actually did study the issue rather carefully. And much of the arguments that I make is based on research that services themselves did on their early attempts at integration, which did point out many of the problems. Of course, when they pointed up many of the problems, well, the politics was that, well, we don't want to pay attention to these. And so they did stop studying these issues and just ignore them. They just ignore the questions, ignore the problems. And and of course, there's an awful lot of emphasis on just going with the program. As I've always argued, the worst thing about the policy of including women on an equal footing with men is that we just basically end up lying to ourselves about the issue. The dishonesty that becomes part of the institution with its senior admirals and generals, not to mention, of course, the political appointees over them, but the admirals and generals just insisting this is what it is and pretending that there aren't any significant problems. And what problems do come up, well, they blame that on lower level leaders, really. It's a leadership problem. That's always the answer given. Somebody's to blame, but it's not the policy itself. It's just not dishonest. It just ignores obvious reality, all the problems that do come from things, from having women like that, and does degrade readiness. So it demoralizes the force in its dishonesty. It leads to a much more costly force. Changes the culture of the military as well, because women just don't think about the military the same way men do. Women don't grow up playing army or reading military history. They're just really not interested in those things. And so when you bring them into the military, it just becomes sort of more of a job in which you wear a uniform, and that's it. A lot of problems that go, and basically when you just weigh the pluses and minuses, the minuses outweigh the pluses quite significantly. No real military need for women except in certain select jobs. There are some jobs that civil affairs jobs, for instance, and medical professions in general. It's hard to recruit. Obviously, it's a job in the medical professions. You can work anywhere and you can make lots of money. So it's rather hard to recruit doctors and even nurses to go into the military. And you could hardly have the military branch or the medical branch of the military services without including women. So that's one area where it says historically they've been able to contribute actually most to the military. A lot of great Army nurses or service nurses who were very caring, provided an awful lot of care and encouragement to a lot of wounded veterans there. So that's a classic job for women that's very well needed. And as I say, some other civil affairs jobs. But and virtually every other profession in civil affairs, because there you're dealing with feminine or female population, and it helps to have women who can talk to women in many parts of the world. But other than that, there just aren't a lot of jobs where women offer any advantage. They're just not better at anything else than men are. Uh, and if they are better in some slight degree, it doesn't outweigh the trouble, the costs that go along with having them as a part of the force and deploying them and whatnot. So.
So it sounds like at the very high level, there's a political motivation and drive coming from the very top here that's kind of influencing thing. And then the very high level military personnel are going along with this, or they're getting pushed out and replaced if they don't do that through political appointing. Is that the right understanding?
Yes, it's what we see. And now, of course, not just about women in the military, but all the business of just denying the obvious difference of male and female it's part of the ideology. And it's so essential to the worldview of the Western world now that they just have to, in a sense, go along with the ideology because otherwise their whole worldview just sort of crashes. So they insist more and more on this denial of male and female. And they find any possible way to make it work or to avoid the problems that are there or to explain them away and blame them on other people. It's incredible insidious that you're just not allowed to think that way. You basically train people and reward people for not thinking in realistic terms and instead sticking to the narrative. And the narrative is women were oppressed and women can do anything men do. And by the way, well, and if the women want to be men, we've got to go along with that. And if the men want to be women, we've got to go along with that. It's just all it's a narrative based, as some people say, a narrative based reality rather than a reality based reality. So
Mhm. Yeah,
ideology.
in researching for this conversation, I was looking at some different academic papers that have been made here in Denmark up to this decision as well. And one of the papers that I just highlighted was seemed to be very typical for the whole genre was they're very much based on a kind of like a social constructivist methodology
Right.
where they're all based on this idea. So what they say is that we show how I'm reading up here a historically produced gender narrative
Hmm.
based on fictional stories, it highlights fictional stories on what women can and can't do, is perceived as true and thereby cast women as less suitable for a military career. So
Oh,
it's all about they assume
right.
a socialist constructivist
Yeah.
approach in their
Yeah.
methodology, and then they obviously find that everything is socially constructed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And the odd thing is that it completely turns the story on its head in terms of the fictional stories, because there are lots of fictional stories about women warriors, and in fact, feminists have looked at that. Boudica in Britain, and the ancient Amazons, which were totally fictional.
mm,
And yet for a long time that people thought, well, there's something to that. There were Scythian warriors. They were rumored to have women warriors, and they do find graves actually of women dressed as warriors there. But
mm,
there's other little historical basis for that. You're talking about a very military culture. Yes, that might actually sort of encourage women to fight, but doesn't make them better fighters.
mm,
It doesn't mean that, well, they were soldiers just like or on an equal footing with male soldiers there. And we have no real historical example of female fighters succeeding in battle against male forces, or even there being female formations, female
mm.
armies.
You haven't watched the series Vikings? That was, I think it was a Netflix series where the one female soldier kind of develops, and like by season 5 or 6, there's this like clan of female warriors that are
Oh,
totally destroying all of the
oh,
male
yeah.
groups.
Yeah, I think I saw one or two episodes of that and then decided that it wasn't
Ragnar
for
Lothbrok,
me.
yeah.
Uh,
So
well, well, go ahead.
yeah.
I was going to
I'd
say one
like to,
episode.
so some people listening to this might not be familiar with this. This might be a new understanding for a lot of people. I think for some people who haven't even thought that much about this, they may be, I think in Scandinavia here, a lot of people are kind of waking up to the idea that this, you know, treating equality, like kind of the quest towards equality, meaning that we have to treat men and women identically is becoming more and more dysfunctional. And of course, we're especially seeing this in sports where
Right.
we have the transgender phenomenon in sports as well. But in many other areas as well, people are realizing this. So maybe I was actually just looking at some of the kind of results of this presidential commission that you were involved in back in the 90s, and saw some of the, I don't know if I should highlight, but there were specific points that the commission voted on where the women should be included in ground combat roles and special operations roles. And if there was, physical requirements should be equal for men and women, or they should be, specially adapted or something like that as well. What would you say are the most important points where you can clearly see the disadvantage of including women in the armed forces?
Well, the physical standards are never the same. If they're the same, they're so low as to be laughable to just not hold men to any standard other than, well, the way they come in. There is a much wider gap between the physical abilities of men and the physical abilities of women there. And you can easily tell this on a road march. If you have a group of soldiers, some male, some female, and you put 60-pound packs on their back and you just start them walking down the road, well, in about 20 minutes, you're going to have two groups of soldiers there. The men are going to be well ahead of the women, and they're going to go farther and farther ahead of the women the farther and farther they march there. The women are just shorter. They have shorter legs. We don't sometimes notice that in our daily lives because women wear high heels that make them look a lot taller. But when they have a heel the same size as men, everybody would notice that women are actually very short.
Mhm.
And they just don't put on muscle the way men do. And so they can't do a lot of jobs that men do. The men end up doing a lot of the heavy lifting when you have to set up a tent or something. And actually they end up having to assign more soldiers or service members to jobs in order for the job to get done.
Mhm.
A job that required in the Air Force that required loading a missile onto an airplane. Well, it only needed two men to carry the missile, but with women, you need three.
Mhm.
And if you've got two men and one woman, well, you put the one woman in the middle, where of course it's far less critical. Not at the other end, where the weaker link there might actually cause a problem there.
Mhm.
I also give the example in my books of a firefighting unit, a Navy firefighting unit in Alaska that basically had to add people to every firefighting team. They had to add a fifth person instead of four. It took five in order for the women to be able to do the job there. And so you're talking about a significant increase in personnel just to do the same job. And even then, in a lot of doing those jobs, the stress on women is such that their bodies wear out. They suffer stress fractures and other strains that from trying to carry the weight of men
Mhm.
that men wouldn't suffer. Men are just made for that kind of hard physical work, and women are not. And so you have significant differences there just in the ability, and which is why they always have to double the standards if they're in any way meaningful. They deny it. They call them dual standards instead of double standards.
Mhm.
Just laughable to the extent they go to say, well, no, these are dual standards. Even in court cases, they'll just dig in and insist that, well, no, the dual standards are not double standards, or quotas too. You have to quota. No, they're not quotas. They're expectations. Um, all the euphemisms they use in order to avoid admitting what's plainly obvious.
Yeah.
So,
So there's some obvious physical differences, but then I think more interestingly, in some ways, is also the psychological differences,
oh,
and maybe one word could call like a male propensity towards, uh, yeah, strength in conflict or something
right.
like that, and
Absolute
the differences
aggressiveness.
and in some ways, certainly in Denmark, here where I live, I think at least for a generation now, or maybe not a whole generation, but yeah, it's getting on to 30, 40 years. There's a very strong tendency towards young girls are very, very strongly encouraged to be strong, independent,
Right.
to be able to, be fighters. Whereas
Yeah.
boys, the same qualities are actively discouraged a lot of the time in boys.
Yeah.
And so what we see, and so I've seen in groups here I'm involved in the Danish Home Guard, and I've seen in the groups where what you'll see is that often there'll be male and females in the same group together. And
Mm.
at a lot of the time, that fighting spirit will be far more obvious in the girls. And a lot of the time, you'll see like a kind of top notch soldiers will be the girls in the group. But then
Yeah.
we actually, I've had an experience where we then, as a kind of team building fun thing, we went and played airsoft, where these kind of very realistic guns where you shoot little plastic pellets at each other.
Right.
And what you saw there was that the female soldier, who's like the top-notch soldier in normal situations, the moment someone's shooting at her just with plastic bullets,
Yeah.
then there isn't the same kind of determination in facing and defeating an enemy
Yeah.
in the same way as well. You and me recently, just I think both of us noted a conversation that Jordan Peterson had with a woman. I think her name was Kelsey Shireen. I don't actually know who she is, but yeah,
Yeah.
but she kind of like pointed this like, oh, and it's like, men are like bad and evil and need to be, stop raping women and then everything will be fine, kind of thing. That was the general approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She just blamed it all on men, and just denied that having women in the military actually results in the victimization of women. She says, well, that always happens. Oh, as if, well, if you didn't have any women, it would still happen. No, of course not. But when you
Mhm.
mix men and women together, well, yeah, then you're going to have victimization there, and it's almost impossible to stop it.
Mhm.
So it's
Can you just
just
say why is it impossible to stop it?
well, it's men. I mean, you're just mixing men and women together, and that alone, and you can't, of course, supervise them at all times. There, you have to trust
Mhm.
the men and the women to behave, but they don't. We live in a fallen world. Sex is a very powerful motivation. And especially when you put, in a sense, a man in charge of women, there is a temptation there. Some men, not all men by any means, but some men are going to be tempted to sort of use that leverage for sexual purposes.
Mhm.
So that's going to happen.
Yeah.
The
And some
actual,
women will also use their sexual attractiveness as also leverage for their own advantage as
absolutely,
well. And then
absolutely.
maybe feel bad about it and want to blame someone else afterwards, of course, as
That's the
well.
way they play the game too. Yes, it's just inevitable that they'll use it to get better treatment. That this men and women are going to form those bonds one way or another when you put them together, and those are the problems that just get ignored. Or when they come up, they're just blamed on the leadership. The leadership's the problem, you know. And so you have leaders at one level blaming leaders at lower levels. That's just not the way an organization works. It just destroys trust
Mhm.
among the ranks. And it demonstrates that the people in charge really don't care that much about the people they're in charge of. And they're really not that honest when it comes to dealing with issues. And
Mhm.
soldiers know this. They know that well, this is just the way we have to live and put up with these things.
Mhm.
Um, Terribly discouraging, demoralizing, which is why the U.S. is having a problem now of keeping and retaining, recruiting and then retaining good men because of all the wokeness, which began, of course, with the introduction of women into the military largely in the 1970s. So it's just gotten worse and worse.
Yeah, it's concerning, so as a, citizen of a NATO country leading, I mean, we're basically just following what you guys are doing. Sometimes we go even further. Um, then it's I don't know what is your understanding of like how does one react in this kind of situation? Because what I see is that the military's always played a central role in establishing, the social cultural backbone of the country, of the society, and creating strong fathers and strong families. It trains discipline and centeredness. And
Well,
now,
it has been a model for manhood and the role of men, which is why feminists are so insistent about destroying the military in that way, destroying that masculine aspect to it, and feminizing it as much as possible. Putting a feminine face in all the recruiting ads there. I mean, and you do actually have to labor more, spend more on advertising to recruit women than you do for men. And in fact, you'd do better. You'd recruit more men if you didn't recruit women, because young men don't aspire to be girls. No, they want to be men. And yet you present a picture of a pretty girl in uniform, and it's a real turnoff, and that's why we're having the problems we're having now. But yeah, the military by its very essence is very masculine. It does require aggressiveness, and women just don't really have that. In my time in the military, I spent 7 years, starting out in the infantry. I was an airborne, I was a paratrooper, platoon officer, platoon leader, and then went into counterintelligence. And while I was in counterintelligence, I met a fellow, an older warrant officer who told me one day, in Europe during the Cold War, you would have teams of intel officers that would tag along, sort of chasing Soviet liaison officers, Soviet military personnel who were stationed in NATO countries, and they were allowed to some freedom, but you always wanted to keep tabs with them, and so they would have to follow in cars, and of course the Soviets would try to lose their tail. And our guys would try to, of course, stay with them. But he said, you couldn't let a woman drive the car. She just wouldn't keep up. She just would not drive as fast or be as daring in driving in order to keep up. You had to have a man do the job. A clear demonstration of that lack of aggressiveness, which we do oftentimes see with female drivers there. They just, they're not as comfortable behind the wheel. They don't actually have, on average, the same degree of sort of spatial awareness, a harder time judging differences, knowing whether the car is going to fit into the parking space.
Mhm.
Um, they take a longer time to do those things
Mhm.
than men do. This is just biological, the way our brains work versus the way theirs work.
So, Father Patrick, someone listening to this and not familiar with the work might think, well, this is just like a grumpy old man who believes that women are inferior to men and need to be subjugated and pushed down. And so, what I've looking into your work, what I've found is an idea that I actually haven't encountered anywhere else before. But you've written a book called Origins Revenge, where you kind of lay out an idea or an understanding of the differences between male and female, which is but really, I think that you use the word hierarchy as opposed to archy, and then a Eucharistic difference in this kind of differentiation, which is more based on the differences are, or these the distinctions based on unity and intimacy, based on a shared source or derivative of being,
Right.
instead of it being based on inequality and difference. So maybe you can try and explain this a little bit better than what I'm managing here.
Yeah.
To
Well,
say, like, what do you say to someone who says, well, you're just trying to, you're looking down on women, you don't appreciate them, or you think that they're inferior?
Well, I'll start by first talking about you're pointing now to the mystery of male and female, and it
Yeah.
is a mystery, and it is something that I think I've contributed to under the understanding of, and that's the culmination of my work. But my work, my concern for male and female, and my writing about it, actually began with the reality, the obvious social reality of male and female, and it happened while I was in college in the 70s, late 70s there. I read a book by George Gilder, who later became a best-selling author, writing about wealth and poverty, economic issues, and whatnot from a social perspective. But he wrote a book called Sexual Suicide. And in 1973, 50 years ago, in fact, I blogged recently on the 50th anniversary of it. I'm probably the only person in the world who even remarked on the 50th anniversary of it. But it did sort of change my life, and cluing me in to a real problem. But Gilder's argument in Sexual Suicide was that women actually have tremendous power over men, especially when they're young. When they're young and beautiful, when they're sexy, men, the desire is such that men will commit their lives to providing for that woman just to be able to have her um, as a wife. And that is what civilization is in a sense based on. What we've
The
done,
Trojan War is an example, I guess, and
yes,
Hitler in
yes,
Paris,
they,
right?
they're incredibly powerful, and of course, some of them know, a lot of them know that, and they use it to evil purposes. But for the most part, no, it's just that that there's they have this attraction, and that men will commit themselves. The problem with feminism is it doesn't respect that, because that's an attraction that is about ultimately about the woman submitting to the man sexually and then also becoming a mother. And of course, feminism is not about that, because they perceive that, well, this isn't really power. This is just being abused. And of course, what they want to do is change the legal system, because a lot of it is this is just simply forced. It's laws that force us to ignore this difference between men and women, and shift the balance in favor of women, so that not only do they have that great sexual social power when they're young and beautiful, but they also have added legal standing when it comes to employment, and when it comes to any other recognition of advancement in society in terms of political and whatnot, holding positions of power. And the word power is very important to feminists. They've always talked about power. Women want power. They don't have any power. They always perceive the woman at home, the mother, as powerless. This is just basically fundamentally Marxist, and many of the early feminists were indeed Marxists. But that's what they've done. They've shifted the balance entirely in favor of the woman. So not only does she have this sexual power very early on, but she also has a legal system that favors her in everything she does, in academia, in employment. It's just all rigged to favor women. And what does the man then offer the woman? She may now make more than he does. She has advanced degrees that he doesn't have. It used to be the other way around. Men were the ones who went on to advanced education. They became the doctors, but now it's shifted much more towards the women. There are more women in postgraduate work, and they're taking over fields. And so men really don't have a whole lot to offer, and the women do also sort of have much higher expectations now because well, they want somebody who makes more than they do, even though everything's geared to having them make more than the men. And of course, what we see now, and you can see it easily on social media, is that a lot of men have realized this and they're just sort of opting out. They realize what a wreck feminism has made. And so men and women aren't getting married. They aren't getting together to live interdependently the way they used to, because everything is just about pleasing women. Let women do what they want to do. So
Mhm.
that's something that Gilder saw 50 years ago, and he called it sexual suicide. And we see it now, the demographic collapse of the Western world,
Mhm.
because women just have decided not to have children by and large.
Mhm.
Yeah, they might whine about still wanting to get married, still wanting a man, but they very oftentimes are not willing. They waited too long. They wait too long, and they don't give up enough of their own life in order to attract a man.
Mhm.
That's the social reality, and Gilder opened my eyes to it. And then when I went into the military, I grew up wanting to be both a soldier and a writer. When I went into the military, I did there then see what was going on. And when I decided I'd rather be a writer, I decided that I would write about this problem there,
Mhm.
which was significant. So I did write the first book from a non-feminist perspective on women in the military.
Mhm.
And in fact, I also wrote the second one because the second book was published before anyone else did. There have been several good books written since then about it.
Mhm.
But that's how, in a sense, I started my writing career. It's been the issue that I've written about. It did move me ultimately to the whole issue of male and female, to searching for a more secure basis for Christian faith than I was seeing, and ultimately led me to one of the major reasons I started looking for the Orthodox Church was that, well, when it comes to interpreting the Bible, I found that people were interpreting the Bible just very differently. And all those verses that feminists don't like, well, they would just rationalize them in one way, mostly by saying, well, that was then, that was for that culture. And so I looked around and found a church that still actually taught certain things. It didn't just dismiss those things. It actually, you find them throughout the fathers. There's very little difference of opinion among the fathers on this matter of male and female, except in the more Origenist um, view, the Alexandrian tradition out of Origin from
Yeah.
Alexandria.
Yeah.
And that's what Origen's Revenge is about.
Yeah.
It's
And this is
about
a
this
third century writer who produced a large body of work in the city of Alexandria, right? And
very
uh,
Platonist.
yeah,
And a
Platonist.
lot of Platonists came from Alexandria. It was a center of education. You also had Valentinus, who was an early heretic, a generation before Origen, and
Mhm.
Philo of Alexandria, who was Jewish, a Jewish
Mhm.
philosopher in the first century,
Mhm.
contemporary of Christ, and all very Platonist in their view. And
Mhm.
the Platonic view is basically that sex is all about the body, and its real only purpose is procreation,
Mhm.
and generally something that you were supposed to grow out of and put off. In the Platonist view, the soul puts off the body. The person is really the soul and not the body. And you
Mhm.
put off the body in order to advance closer to the one, to God. And that idea is right there in Origin. In a sense, he tries to philosophize Christianity so as to defend it against the philosophers,
Mhm.
and he imports a lot of Platonist thinking
Mhm.
into Christianity, and he wrote so much, and he was so brilliant that a lot of people fell into that way of thinking.
Mhm.
It still survives. There are still Origenists,
Mhm.
or Evagrians, a later writer from the late fourth century, who
Mhm.
was even more Platonist than Origen is. And yet it was very influential in the Orthodox Church's monastic life.
Mhm.
And then you have Gregory of Nyssa, late fourth century, also a friend of Evagrius,
Mhm.
and Evagrius Ponticus. And then later on, a couple of centuries later, you have Maximus Confessor, who also continues this tradition, part of this tradition, which has always been there since
Mhm.
Origin, of thinking in these terms.
Can you map for us how the kind of Platonist thinking is that what's also influencing this feminist approach today in what we're seeing, for example, in the military, where we're kind of trying to erase the differences between male and females? Is that something that you're seeing as well, or
Well, it's kind of in a similar perversion in the
yeah,
sense that um, you're effectively denying the physical reality of
mhm,
who we are, the biological reality,
yeah.
and in a sense trying to, you're striving for a reality that is beyond that
Mhm.
biological reality.
So this is
Um,
Gnosticism, as I understand it, as well, right? Where Origin also has been accused of Gnostic
yes.
tendencies or being the roots of some of Gnostic
Oh,
thought.
yes. And that was always there, even before Origin.
Yeah.
Origin is the scholar who sort of scholar in a scholarly fashion imports these ideas into
Into
Christianity,
Christianity.
and therefore it becomes the base. But even before that, as I mentioned with the Valentinus, the Valentinian heresy, well, they were Gnostics. They had this elaborate view of the next life, of the celestial realm,
Hmm.
and very just a lot of it, and it did involve issues of male and female, but not there in the way that we live male and female.
Hmm.
For them and for many other Gnostic heretics, they also took this generally Greek philosophical view that that sex is about the body, male and female is all about the body. It has no bearing upon the soul, really, and it's something the soul would put off. And so, yes, there were many Gnostics who preached against marriage, even saying that marriage is a sin, just another form of fornication.
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I understand this is something we see most clearly in the trans movement today, where it actually leads to a total rejection. It like flips over to a total rejection of the body. You know,
right.
your physical body is irrelevant. It's what you think you are, which is the most, or what you feel you are, is the
Yes.
most important. Even so, I have my 17-year-old son in his biology classes where he went to school was told by his biology teacher pretty much every single week that the only gender that's important is the one that you feel you are
Uh,
instead of it.
yeah.
And so that's what's really informing how these ideas have grown and developed in some way.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
from
terribly satanic when you think about it, because what does Satan do but want to, in a sense, define himself, be what he wants to be, regardless of what the Creator has made him,
Yeah.
and that's what we're trying to do. These people that want to just allow the individual complete autonomy to define himself, to name himself, and this is very unchristian. There is a fashion, there's a trend now with when people convert and they become Orthodox, they sort of get to pick a new name. And yet that's just not the way you get names. And names are supposed to be given to you because you receive your being from somebody else. And this gets to the theological point of Origen's revenge. A better way, a way of understanding male and female that is about this idea of sourceness, in a sense, that human persons come from other persons. Just as within the Christian Trinity, you have this relationship of person from person, the Father giving all that he has, and indeed his own being, to the Son, and the Son then responding thankfully for that gift of existence of what he is there.
Mhm.
This, in a sense, is our model. And this is what I do instead of, and many people many Christians in trying to explain male and female will actually start with what they think they know about male and female, men and
Mhm.
women, and then look for that in the Trinity. And so, in a sense, they
Mhm.
end up just simply projecting male and female on the Trinity.
Yeah.
Whereas the safer way to go, because the fathers were always like, no, 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 we don't want to get into male and female in the Trinity, because, well, they understood it in a very physical way. So the safe way to go is you look to the Gospels, and you look at male and female in terms, or it's not male and female. You look at what's said about the Father and the Son and their relationship. And what you find is that although there are many things said about both of them and the way they relate to each other, nevertheless, all the giving between the two of them is by the Father, and
Mhm.
all the thanking is by the Son. Not once is it said that the Father thanks the Son, and not once is it said that the Son gives anything to the Father except thanks.
Mhm.
And so you have this sort of self-giving and thanksgiving that is the basis of this personal, this absolutely fundamental, original it can't be more absolute, really.
Mhm.
A way of relating personally, and that's why we call them the Father and the Son, the self-giving and the thanksgiving, two modes of relation there. I use Greek terms also to refer to them. Of course, the Greek term for thanksgiving is Eucharist, and so you have this Eucharistic mode of thanking someone for the gift of your being for them, from them. But then you also have the archic mode of the self-giving, archic from the arche, meaning beginning, really, and a source in that sense, too. The fathers do use this term of the Father, God the Father, as the arche of the Son, and the Son is the arche of creation. But not the arche, of course, the Father or the Holy Spirit. The Father, and Orthodox teaching, of course, the Father is the arche of both the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Mhm.
And yet towards the world, God, the whole Trinity is the arche, the source, and the Son in particular is the arche in terms of being the logos,
Mhm.
um, from which, in a sense, everything is made.
So am I going a step too far if I understand it that then the relationship between male and female is a kind of fractal based on that pattern of the relationship between the father and the son?
Yes, yes,
That's
yeah.
the correct.
And the great thing about this is that it fits male and female, the difference between men and women, into the same pattern as many other relationships, fathers and sons, and parents and children in
Hmm.
general,
Hmm.
mothers and children,
Hmm.
and but then also priests and people,
Hmm.
kings, and political leaders, in a sense, also in the Christian sense, have this role of self-giving, of living for the country that they're serving there, and that's actually how Byzantine emperors presented themselves to the people,
Hmm.
as tireless civil servants in a way.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's the Christian way. You understand yourself as a civil servant
Yeah.
and serving others. Even the military, U.S. military, actually, in the Army, when it trained leadership, a lot of the instruction, the expectation, the sense, the ethos was of this sort of sacrificial aspect of the leader, the commander, actually working for his troops and making sure they were taken care of, and also accomplishing the mission there. Yeah. See, and you can't lead unless you're willing to risk your life for them. And
Hmm.
if you're willing to do that in the military, then they will follow you to hell, as they say.
Hmm.
It's so important that
Hmm.
you be brave and that you be self-giving and demonstrate that genuine concern for the welfare of the troops.
Yeah.
So,
So, I mean, but a large part of my reason for becoming involved in the military services in my kind of, I'm 42 today.
right,
I wasn't a soldier when I was younger, but I joined now. It's because I really believe there's something essential about that form of, employment or being whatever that you find in there, which connects one to reality.
right.
And so I think that's why these things are showing up so clearly. And what I heard you talking about this, how this political ideology is kind of coming down and it's causing people to have to live by lies somehow. It's that everyone's having to avoid watching what's actually happening. So what we're seeing in the Danish military as well, at the same time that this is being pushed through, that men and women should be all the same and all treated the same, then there's this massive campaign to try and dig up scandals and harassment cases and stuff like that as well, because they want to prove that all the problem is based on the males and male aggression or whatever it is like that. But what's happening is it's causing it to become a very dysfunctional organization. And we're seeing this throughout the West at the moment, I think, is that all militaries, it's certainly just not, here in Denmark, we're really, really struggling. And so now, now it's not just males that have, that can get forced into war, but females, your daughters can also get
Yeah, yeah.
conscripted, right?
Yeah, we're not
Um,
quite there here in the U.S., but yeah, there are people
yeah.
want to.
Yeah. Well, I know. Yeah. But there's something about um, being like this being the way things really are. The feminist view that you spoke about of power, it's a very kind of win-lose situation,
Yeah.
which at the end of the day is just people all scrambling, like, kind of
Oh,
crab mentality, trying to pull each other down from the edge of the bucket. All the crabs are trying to climb out, and it just doesn't work. It's not the way that reality works out. Reality wants to become more harmonious. And so the way that you talk about, these relationships, this thing of, leadership has to be that which will serve those that are below it. It has to include and transcend the differences, be able to lift others up as well. And that's what actually works.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the left, the ideology behind all of this is, as many people would say, fundamentally Marxist. Well, and what that means, though, is it's ultimately about a grievance. It's about the grievances of people against people. That's the very basis of their worldview there. Everything, justice is all about grievance, settling grievances. And you can't give that up. If that's the fundament, if that's the basis of your view, then you have to keep making grievances. You have to keep complaining about things. You
Mhm.
can't give it up because then there's no other basis to right and wrong for these people. It's all about somebody done me wrong and they should pay for it. That's Rousseauian too. It goes back well before Marx. It's part of the Western world, the way it's evolved
Mhm.
over time,
Mhm.
much in the last 3 centuries there.
Can you
But
connect that for us? How we're talking about this kind of Gnostic tendencies of rejecting reality, to the focus on grievances. Then you have
well,
how's that related to what Rousseau was saying?
Well, this idea that I've been done wrong. And Rousseau says, man was born free, but is everywhere in chains. He's enchained by other people. He's, of course, so blames private property on things there. That's when people, he's in his view, originally everything was in common, but people then started fencing off things for themselves and whatnot. So he makes a complaint against civilization
Mhm.
about the restraints that civilization puts on people. It's a sort of a childish complaint that, well, I can't be what I want to do. I can't do what I want to do.
Mhm.
And you find that in the Communist Manifesto. It actually talks about, oh yes, when we finally get there, people will be able to do anything they want to do. If they
Mhm.
want to fish in the morning, they can do that. If they want to work in the morning, they can do that. They can pick or they can work in the morning, fish in the afternoon, all this freedom that's promised, as if, well, there will be no limitations on our being. We'll be entirely free.
Mhm.
It's satanic. It's in the sense of, yes, it's this assertion of self that simply will not admit that we owe anything to other people, that we don't owe things. It ignores the fact that we're given life by people,
Mhm.
and we come into this life as debtors to people who've raised us. The modern way of thinking is a rebellion against that. No, I don't owe anything to my parents. It's right there in the Ten Commandments: honor thy father and thy mother for a reason. It's teaching to teach us indeed that we do owe something to those who come before us, who give us life, who live their lives for us.
Mhm.
This is what personal life is really all about. It only exists in that form. And yet the grievance mentality wants to rebel against that, where the individual simply defines himself. And you can't get more complete than, being able to pick your gender and change your gender if you want.
Mhm.
And that's what
Yeah.
we've come to. It's all about the individual just asserting the self.
Okay.
Uh, so,
Well, to not end on a very negative note, Father Patrick, maybe we can finish off by talking a little bit about the Orthodox Church and the way the vision or the understanding that's presented. We already spoke a little bit about the internal kind of dynamic of the Trinity,
right,
but what is it that like I think a lot of these ideas, the Rousseauian idea is offering, and Marxism is offering paradise on earth.
right.
And there's some kind of idea of that in Christianity as well, as like a new heaven and a new earth, right? And the realization, like Christ says, the kingdom of heaven is within you, and we in some ways the kingdom of heaven is now as well. But how does that differ from the Rousseauian Marxist understanding of things?
Oh, well, yeah. The kingdom, it is a kingdom, which means, of course, there is a king. So our whole lives are meant to be Eucharistic towards God, and actually Eucharistic towards many other people. We are really meant to be both self-giving and thanksgiving. And sometimes that relationship is specified, yeah, in the sense that, yes, when it comes to men and women, it's men who are given the thanksgiving role, that and then both of these roles are Christ-like, of course, because Christ, of course, is thanksgiving towards the Father, but self-giving towards us. He gives his life for us. And that's exactly what St. Paul says in Ephesians 5 about men and women. The man is to love his wife as Christ loved the church and gave his life for it. That's the man's job, to give of himself for the woman. And the woman's response is to be respectful and obedient. It's often said to be the least obedient, at least subjection there is. And John Chrysostom says that, but nevertheless, there is that aspect. It is a fallen world.
Mhm.
Yeah, one thing I do in the book is distinguish between the natural order, natural relation of self-giving and thanksgiving, and then the economic, which is after the fall. There's where some subjection does come into things. Whereas the woman is committed to the man's charge, the man has responsibility for the woman. He has to live for her, protect her, fight for her. And of course, you can't expect somebody to be responsible for something they have no control over. To be responsible, you have to be able to have some control over that thing you're responsible for. And in that case, it's the woman. So there is that. There is some subjection, for as St. John Chrysostom says, for with us the woman is reasonably subjected to the man, for equality of honor causeth contention. And this is just simply undisputed among the fathers. This is assumed. This is biblical. It's traditional. It's apostolic. It's patristic. It's just that's the way that things are ordered.
Mhm.
Uh,
So
and
can you say it again? Reasonably subjected to the man because
yes,
equality of honor causes contention.
causes contention there. Yes,
The
that's
men receive the greater honor for doing the greater work of offering their lives,
well, they
and
think
it's within reasonable bounds that
right,
women
right.
are expected to
Oh yeah,
submit to the male leadership because that's what's going to give him the
yeah.
um, mhm,
He says, right. He says elsewhere that, and from the beginning, God made one sovereignty only, that of the man over the woman. But after that, our race ran headlong into extreme disorder. He created other sovereignties over, also those of governors and of masters. And then he says, and this too, for love's sake. See,
yeah,
it's for our
both
own
of them.
good that we are made subject to other people. We, being fallen, cannot be trusted to simply live as we should. We lose freedom just for our own good to keep society together is really what it's all about. Otherwise, people just disintegrate and go off on their own,
Yeah.
which is of
And the
course
other
what.
quote that I sometimes mention to in conversations from Chrysostom is I think he says somewhere directly that like equality of I can't remember exactly, but if men and women are completely equal in their say, then there's going to be conflict and disorder. So there has to
Yeah,
be harmony comes from leadership and someone following. And
yeah,
I guess in certain situations there might be cases where the woman knows better, but what me and my wife we have a shared focus and understanding that the way that harmony is achieved is by me learning to listen to her better, but also her learning to submit to me more, and
yeah,
and so that there is a clear pattern to follow.
right.
Based on that, we both know that I'm the one who's often better at making decisions, and she's often better at sensing and being emotionally in tune with and stuff like that as well,
Yeah.
and being patient and things like that.
Yeah. But she, of course, but she takes, this is the thing, when you look at, you can look at Christ and you can see the source. We talk of Christ as being the archetype, in a sense, the
Mm-hmm.
logos from
Mm-hmm.
which we get our being. Well, that includes male and female. And we don't say, well, and that makes Christ sometimes feminine. No, no, but what he does, both the man and the woman do, in the sense that the man takes the archic role of Christ, the self-giving role, and the woman takes the Eucharistic role of Christ, that thanking role to the Father. But then she, in her other relationships, and with the children in particular, takes the archic role, and the children take the Eucharistic role. She is the self giver to
Mm-hmm.
the children. And you can hardly imagine a more dominant position in society than that of a mother over children. Initially, it's in the terms of both the self-giving and then also the control.
Mm-hmm.
That's where she makes the decisions, and she's better at making them than the child. So she has that, and you could extend it at other times. Older women towards younger women, well, they would be the ones to be self-giving and leaders,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the younger women would be Thanksgiving. And so they both get a chance to be like Christ in being self-giving and thanksgiving. It's just that between the man and the woman, yes, it's sort of designated there. And part of our humility of our salvation can't be saved without being humble, but it's accepting that designation, that ordination, really, because we're ordered this way. And
Mhm.
so we're ordained to be a man or a woman. It's an honor. And we really do ourselves a dishonor by rejecting that ordination.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a very broad conversation, but it really kind of lands on me again how when we start talking about women in the military, like these things are all based in integrated parts of human life, which is naturally based in family structures. And while what we're seeing in the West right now, you can look back in the 50s and see the feminist manifestos and plans of what they're trying to do, which was to destroy the family unit.
Well, yeah,
And part of that is destroying these
yeah,
other structures and understandings of gender. And so
yeah.
we need to, these things are all interrelated and connected with each other. And someone listening to this might be thinking about the political, philosophical implications of women in the military and equality and stuff like that. But it's really based in your personal experience of, being a father, being a son, being a husband or a wife or something like that. And lacking those connections, then people look for salvation in other things, I guess, right? Of political programs or something like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. A very worldly and a very selfish escape from the world, and that's what Gnosticism was all about: an escape from the world. People who are bored or dissatisfied with the world and looking for an out. And a lot of times it was by joining a cult where they could be, the elite, the ones in the know, the ones who knew the secrets and participated in the things reserved for others, and they could feel special that way.
Mhm.
Very vain. And yes, ultimately, just the view that you still find among the various communist vanguards there, wanting to be seeing themselves as the elite and never as a member of the masses they talk about. Um, um, they're not there to be masses; they're there to lead everyone else to that glorious land of never-ending joy and whatnot. So, but
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Father Patrick. Really appreciate your time. I'm hoping that we can have another conversation digging more into the book, The Revenge of Origin, and the ideas in there, and really understanding more these ideas of archy and Eucharistic modes of being, and the relationship between Christ and Church and the Father,
right.
and how that is reflected in our being. I found definitely that there's like a kind of a level of abstraction that can be really useful in looking at the way that my group and platoon works in the military,
Right.
down to my personal life and all the way up to God as well. There's something about these kind of levels of analysis that can help us to join the dots somehow.
Oh, yes. Yeah, sure.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's well, I think what I'm actually giving several talks this year in different conferences, one at the end of this month and then one in Switzerland actually, in the Orthodox academics
Mhm.
in Switzerland at the end of June. And I've already done it once and we'll be publishing the results, but it talks about ordination, which of course is a big male and female and ordination and what. And so there's a lot going on in the church in terms of, women as deaconesses is the issue now, but the more general issue of ordination is something we're still explaining.
Mhm.
And what I'll do is offer I think a very probably the easiest way to explain things. But it does, of course, go to the root of the issue of just what it means to be male and female. And I think that it will be very helpful. It is so far has been very well received.
Mhm.
Um, but of course, in the church, it takes time for something to be fully embraced.
Mhm.
Yes,
Okay.
we talk about that. Lots else to say, really.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, I'll definitely, if I can get it, I'll put out a link to the book and to your blog. I've also seen you've written about some of these topics in there, and then I guess people can also find. And is there also, if I mean, so a large part of our audience is European. Is there a link to the event where you're going to be talking in Switzerland? Is that open to the public?
No,
No.
it's a
Okay.
very small group
Small
of
group.
very traditional Orthodox academics. I've met one member of the group and have been invited to be there as well.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's the thing is if it's too public, it gets infiltrated by other people,
Mhm.
and it's also supposed to be sort of off the record, a
Mhm.
time of can speak candidly and
Mhm.
not fear that you'll be quoted as saying something that will cause you trouble
Mhm.
later on. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's a really interesting point that one could also look at as there's something about the for me in my, before I became a Christian, then I was on a spiritual search for many years and it was in many, many different areas. And what I found is that being in a closed room of men together,
yeah,
where we would have frank male to male conversations and say the unsayable things,
yeah,
that was
yeah,
when I actually started seeing that I could make progress in my own development and understanding of myself and who I was and what I was
yeah,
supposed to be doing.
yeah,
Something really
yeah.
valuable and true about that.
Yeah. If you don't know anybody already involved in this group, and they go by the name Sophie, it's actually an imitation of an American group called Sophia, which stood for the Society of Orthodox Philosophers in America. And so Sophie stands for the Society of Orthodox Philosophers in Europe.
Uh-huh.
And but it was started by a professor in Houston, a man I did have the honor of knowing before he passed on, because he was teaching philosophy at Rice University, and he just wanted to provide an occasion for his own students who'd gone on into academia to come back and have sane conversations without fear
Mhm.
about being quoted and violating the rules, the new rules, the taboos, and whatnot. And it's still ongoing. They still meet. There's another group that a lot of people that were a part of Sophia have founded another group called Paideia, and they're meeting again at the end of this month. That's the meeting I'll speak at again this year.
Mhm.
They've just been together, but that's an alternative to IOTA, which is the International Orthodox Theological Association. Oh, and also the OTSA, the Orthodox Theological Society of America. And it is open to people that want to attend, um, but not a voting organization where leftists could take over. And they do have a public website, and they will be publishing things. Maybe, and we do sometimes have. Last year, at least, they did have some people from Europe who attended. And as far as Sophie goes, well, I can mention your name to the person I know there, and
Mhm.
have you down for to at least be there for it. That'd be great.
Yeah, yeah. Right now, my we moved out to a little homestead with my family, and I'm really focusing on building up things locally here. We don't have a close parish or anything like that, so
Oh,
I'm
really?
looking to
Yeah.
limit international travel. But yeah, certainly having conversations with people. It's great. There's definitely something happening in Europe these days. We can see everywhere young men coming into churches and engaged and interested and looking for more answers. And often guys who have been studying university level programs and just not finding the answers that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Finding
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
just like really everything, what we spoke about, politically motivated, very thin, very kind of
Oh,
artificial
yeah.
explanations of what's happening in the world. And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
yeah.
Unsatisfying. Yeah, I teach catechism at the cathedral here in DC, and it's
Mhm.
just amazing. In the last 5 years, we've seen the numbers grow and grow and grow of people just coming to us, oftentimes having already read a lot about Orthodoxy, but are just now starting to come to church,
Yeah.
and they eat it up. And this is what they're really after there, because they won't get these answers anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For me, yeah, just having attended the Paschal services this week, then it's been really something different to fully participate in. And especially this thing of like the church year of actually going to these services and
Oh,
experiencing
yeah.
them together and how it's just like repeated. What's really struck me is just how it's repeated in the services again and again. Like, today Christ is, handed over to
Yeah.
the Pharisees. Today he is crucified. Today he is in Hades. It's just,
Yeah.
you really are experiencing it there
Oh,
in
yeah,
a
yeah,
completely
yeah.
other way.
The kids love it. My kids grew up Orthodox, and it is
Mhm.
the highlight of the year. It's much bigger than Christmas, really,
Yeah.
and they just love it. That my daughter, when she was in college, she went to a Presbyterian school and several hours away, and so after Pascha, she'd come home for Pascha, and so I was taking her back to college there, and out of the blue, we're just driving down the highway, and she says to me, "Daddy, I could never be Protestant. Their services are so boring." And yes, compared to Pascha, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Uh, there's just so much there, the drama, the beauty, and the meaning, the deep
Mhm.
meaning. It's just
Mhm.
wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. Christ is risen. So,
Yeah, indeed, he is risen. Thank you so much, Father Patrick. Greatly appreciated.
Good talking to you. Good to meet you. Hope to
Yeah,
see you
good to meet
again.
you. Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Let's do it. Yeah.